So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mike Burrows to our first DevOps
Wow.
Twitter chat. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
My pleasure.
I've obviously seen you speak a number of times. I've read your book, Kanban from the Inside. I feel I've learned an awful lot from you over the years just through those experiences. But perhaps you could start by talking a little bit about your background, what work you've done in the past, and sort of your journey towards Kanban, Lean-Agile, and DevOps.
Yes. Well, of course, all of these things is a confluence of many years of career, I suppose. But I spent a large chunk of my career in investment banking, and the particular bank I worked for liked to keep out of the spotlight. You didn't go to things like Agile conferences as an employee of that organisation. But I think we were actually, ahead of most of our competitors in that area. But it was actually very refreshing when I left that bank in the middle of the credit crunch, which is probably all I need to say about that. And I became the IT director of a small to medium-sized startup. It was late-stage startup, about 5 years old, looking to its exit from its, initial, financial structure and so on. My job was to get that company into shape, ready for whatever that exit was going to be, whether it was a trade sale or, but actually it turned out it did a reverse takeover. Joined forces with a larger company, but the MD of my company became the MD of the larger company. That was really good. So that was a success. But it was actually nice to be able to do some of the things a bit more out in the open. I became a much more participatory member of the Agile community, the Lean-Agile community, the Kanban community, and so on. And that was very refreshing after sort of being in a very closed world for a number of years. And I found Kanban in particular, it did two things. One, it helped explain what did and didn't work in my previous jobs, helped explain some of the mistakes I'd made. And that's actually a really good way of learning. When you realise, if only I'd done that, it would have been so much better. And you can easily avoid making some of those same mistakes again. So that was actually really useful. And I think sort of at an intellectual level, be able to really understand what I'd done, perhaps through gut feeling or just copying other people, was really useful. Joined a company with no disrespect at all to the developers involved. Quite actually immature IT-wise, and struggling a little bit, but with exactly the people that I started with, over a period of months, we evolved into, a team that was able to deliver. Took on a team that had not really delivered anything substantial for quite a while, to doing, delivering significant projects, doing multiple releases a week, relative to the DevOps thing as well. Any person in our team could do a release, any day. Could roll it back if they had to. All this kind of stuff. Development and operations were one and the same thing for us. It was the same people doing most of the work. In terms of Kanban, we had stickies on the wall representing the work that we were doing, and pretty much any person could take any piece of work and walk it right across the board, right out to production. In small companies, that's often the way things work. And it's quite interesting when you reflect back on your time in larger companies and you see things that are so siloed, and you realise just how inefficient all of that is, and the stupid delays that arise from the right conversations not happening and all this kind of stuff. I'm certainly not one of these people that thinks that scale is a bad thing. You have to make things fit your situation, but working at a small scale actually teaches you a lot about how good it can be when it's working really well. And you then take those lessons back into larger organisations, which I did after finishing that job. Mission accomplished when the business was sold, and I went into consulting, which is what I've been doing for the last few years, that and training. So that was how I got into using this stuff. I was blogging about my experiences on the Positive Incline blog pretty much since the beginning. And I got a bit of a reputation for, explaining some of the, I wouldn't say obscure parts of Kanban, but perhaps the more challenging parts of Kanban in ways that people understood. I mean, people, even in recent weeks, thanked me for a blog post I wrote years ago on the classes of service, which is, probably regarded as an advanced technique in Kanban. So that's really nice, feedback to get.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the beginning of 2013, it was literally over the New Year holiday of 2013, I published a blog post called Introducing Kanban Through Its Values. And what I did there, I took the principles and practices of Kanban, which actually have evolved slightly since then and evolved in a very positive way. But I took those principles and practices as they were at that time and abstracted from them 9 values, transparency, balance, collaboration, and so on. And it just gave me a new way of looking at the method and a sort of new sort of grounding, so perhaps a slightly more humane way of looking at it. It was quite often accused of being very sort of tool-centric and process-centric and not about people. And I thought actually being able to describe the values that go behind it would be helpful, and people definitely did find it helpful. I mean, it's that post is 3.5 years old now, but it remains the most popular blog post I've ever written, and probably always will be. But it's the one that led to my book. So those 9 values became the first nine chapters of the book, and I found that a really useful way of describing the method, but also broadening it out as well. Transparency can be about more than Kanban boards or using metrics or the different kinds of meetings that you have. Balance can be more about balancing demand and your capacity. Obviously, working progress limits is the practice that inspired that value. But there are also many more ways where seeking balance is important. I worked as a middle manager in a large organisation. Mm-hmm. Competing demands, competing customers, different lines of budget, short-term, medium, long-term demand, technology and demands versus customer demands, all these kind of things. When you're working as a manager, finding the right balance between these different things is really what it's all about. Portfolio management, same deal. So I found it really, really helpful to think about Kanban in these sort of ways and to broaden it out a little bit. And also by thinking about things in a values-driven way, it helps you see connections with other schools of thought, bodies of knowledge, whatever you want to call them as well. Agile is very much values-centered, and that's what the manifesto is all about. Lean's the same. So when I see any framework that you can interpret in a value-centric way, it makes the correspondences very, very easy, and it becomes less about the differences in practice and more about what unites us in terms of the values that we share. And I think that's really powerful and really, really important. So that's the bulk of my journey up to about a year ago. Then I launched Agenda Shift, which has taken us. The idea is really from the very last chapter of my book. So I did what a lot of authors do at the end of a book, write a list of bullet points of things to think about and to take forward after you've read the book. They were organised, again, by those 9 values. I and other people independently, interestingly, took those bullet points and realised, there's the beginnings of an assessment tool here. And various versions of it knocking about. Matt Phillip did a great talk at the London and Paris Lean Kanban conferences a couple of years ago, describing how he used this tool at his company and used it to, in a non-prescriptive way, get teams to understand where they were, agree between themselves what's important, agree what actions they wanted to take. And I've really just rounded that out with online assessment, so you're not emailing spreadsheets around, which I think is pretty horrific for anyone to have to do. But also facilitation tools. So I do workshops based on these, where you're trying to get to the outcomes that people want. You can apply a sort of complexity spin to it as well. Make sure you're using appropriate change management tools. You're not trying to do something in a plan-driven way that's best done in a hypothesis-driven way, for example, or where just doing it is actually the right thing to do, because it's a simple enough change, or it's a change where you need to take some immediate action, or you need to get everybody out of their comfort zone quickly. All sorts of reasons why you might want to take different routes. But a lot of lean startup language in there. Hypothesis-driven change, some A3 in there as well. So what I've done, I've taken a number of different tools, clean language as well. A great tool for coaching tool for getting people out of just homing in too prematurely on their on solutions and getting to think about the outcomes that they want. Getting agreement on those outcomes, and then thinking about what options do we have in order to achieve those outcomes, and so on. And then we work on framing and developing those actions appropriately, making sure that they're going to be followed through. Make sure the feedback loops around it, accountabilities around that, Kanban systems even. And again, this is an area where Lean Startup really helpful. Lean Startup is all about organising a set of bits of work that are driven by hypotheses, and it's actually well documented how to organise those. So that's what I've done. Put that stuff online. I'm in the process, really, in the next few weeks, of making those facilitation materials available to other people as well. I've been writing about Lean-Agile transformation, as well as a white paper you can download on that subject. So really, transforming Lean-Agile transformation is my strapline. There are some specific tools that we are supporting, online and through facilitation materials, but that's all within a broader scenario of Lean-Agile transformation, the strategies that you might want to apply. It's a big, in any organisation of any complexity, it's actually quite a big deal. It needs to be thought about. Just doing one thing probably won't be enough. Just focusing on continuous improvement, just focusing on giving people skills probably won't be enough. It's a multi-dimensional problem, and it needs multi-dimensional solutions as well, or strategies as well. So that's quite a long answer to a short question. That's what I've been up to and why.
And you've been up to a lot.
Connected. But it's all connected, and it's these things. There's a journey that you go through. It takes years, but it all comes together. Certainly, I think the values thing was just. It's hard to know where these things come from, but when you have an idea like that just helps to draw other things together, it then makes everything else so much easier. So it has very much worked for me.
Yeah, and I remember when I read your book for the first time, I think at that time it really pulled together the current state of the art in terms of Kanban, but it also set it against a backdrop of other bodies of knowledge like theories of constraints, in a way that really helped give context to Kanban. So
that's important, yes. Because nothing's ever developed in a vacuum, and that's true of Agile, that's true of DevOps as well. These things aren't in a vacuum. It's very hard to say which one led to what. But understanding the context and all these different things that are out there and the different influences, and also where they contrast as well, helps you make better decisions about where, one set of tools is better than other.
Yeah, and I think the white paper as well is great in that respect, in that it isn't just pushing one method or one approach, but rather it's suggesting almost a tool set and quite effectively comparing them. Both not just in terms of what they're best at, but also what some of the pitfalls are to watch out for. So
very much so.
So really, I found that a very useful read. I think the other thing with the values that really helps is the values help you link with other other approaches. So I think one of the values that you identified for Kanban was collaboration. And when you then start to think, well, how does Kanban fit in with DevOps? You can see that clearly a massive part of DevOps is improving collaboration.
Well, the clue's in the name, isn't it?
Yes. So I suppose moving on then to that, I mean, how do you see the sort of Kanban world fitting in with the DevOps world?
In a few ways, but they share some very similar aims. Taking some of the pain and impediments to flow out of development, enabling things like DevOps more than Kanban is an enabler of continuous delivery, at least the specifics of it. But what Kanban does is make the need for it more visible. You mentioned collaboration. I think Kanban is very good at highlighting where collaboration isn't working as well as it should. Sometimes it takes a little bit of diagnosing to understand exactly what's going on, but it'll certainly tell you that things are getting stuck more often than they should do. In the book I wrote about surprises. Surprises very often a sign that a collaboration hasn't happened. Or didn't happen in a timely way. So you'll see problems, perhaps in testing or in deployment, where the root cause is actually the failure to have some conversations, quite a lot earlier on in the development. Things that you've probably heard of the three amigos conversation, Dev, BA, and QA talking to each other at the beginning of a piece of development. I found that hugely powerful. Just agreeing, what's going to be tested under what general assumptions, by whom, and in what environment, and all those sort of basic things. Who's going to accept it? Really, really basic things. But get people on the same page that there aren't surprises. In the book, I talked a lot about what were for me as a manager very frustrating delays in code review. That's partly about people not making it as a priority, seeing it as a gate rather than the culmination of a collaborative process. Having the right conversations at the right time. There should be no surprises. So, yes, Kanban is very good at highlighting where you have any kind of delay, but where you are frustrated and surprised by a delay, I think it's really useful to ask, how do we allow this to happen, which you'd ask about any kind of problem, but what conversations might have preempted it, what is about the way that we organise ourselves that stops these conversations from happening or doesn't encourage them to happen, so on and so on. You can look at it from a technical point of view as well, look at, quantify how well the work is flowing and where the delays are. How much is that down to technical practice? How much is that due to collaborative things? How much of that is the organisation getting in the way? If DevOps is about eliminating barriers between development and operations, whether that means them talking to each other more effectively and reducing the administrative overhead of getting stuff from one to the other, or it means developers doing the operations as it did in my startup example. With Kanban, those kind of problems should be much more visible.
Yeah, and it's what I do find interesting still is that often when I talk to people about Kanban, they will say, well, actually we're using Scrum, or we're using XP, or name any other agile methodology. So I suppose I'd be interested to hear your views on how is Kanban different to those methods.
Well, it addresses a different set of concerns, first I will say, and I suppose that's true of any method. But also it's complementary to those rather than an alternative to those. I mean, Scrum and XP. You often hear about Scrum with XP practices. So that's a combination of the two. So that's de-emphasizing the process, the XP process, but taking the technical practices from XP and using them with Scrum. With Kanban, you are making sure that the work is visible, that your work in progress is under control, and so on. Various other principles and practices, but those are the two key ones that people remember. Is there anything that I just said that does not apply to Scrum? Would Scrum benefit from making your work more visible? Well, probably yes, it will. There are various visualizations that are very commonly used in Scrum, but are they a good reflection of your actual process? Do they make it easier for you to see where work is getting stuck and why? And is your your work in progress adequately controlled? To an extent, Scrum includes controls on work in progress from the sprint commitment, or the sprint forecast, if that's a better name now. But if you're disciplined about not trying to start everything at once and not trying to stand to park it all at the end of the sprint so that you have something deliverable at the end of the sprint, but have the discipline to start one thing at a time and to finish it, to integrate it, to test it, to get it accepted, item by item, you're pretty much guaranteed to have something working at the end of the sprint. And this again is where Kanban and DevOps I think are very complementary. Rather than thinking our job is to get something working once a fortnight, but our job is never to be more than a few hours away from something that works. I think that puts you in a very very good position. And it's not saying don't do Scrum. It's not we're not saying don't have the the regular rhythms of Scrum. But if you can unblock the output to your process, then everything else will just work so much better. Be disciplined about what you start, but really focus on finishing, and understand that finishing means needs being met, not just code complete. If there's that change of mindset, then I think you're in a much better place.
Yeah, what you're saying there, it's absolutely right, isn't it? It's the value actually being realized means it's done. So even if you've released something into production, if it doesn't do what was needed, then you still haven't really achieved the goal you set out to achieve.
Yes. I'm slightly chuffed actually. I'm to blow my own trumpet here. Our team in Hungary, the team I wrote about in the book, we were practicing doing validation at the end of our process. Stuff stayed on the board until we had proof from our customers that it was already delivering value to them. Now, the marketing mistake I made, I called it implemented rather than validated, but it meant validated, and it involved an explicit conversation between developer and customer. And we were doing this before the Lean Startup book came out, so it was really nice. I actually found there were other people in the Kanban community experimenting with similar things, and we compared notes at the time. But I'm really pleased that sort of practice was popularised by the Lean Startup movement. So many stupid discussions about what does done mean. And ways of describing done that have nothing to do with meeting anybody's need. And I think validation just completely changes that conversation.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's a danger with the term DevOps that we think it's all about improved collaboration between developers and operations people. But actually I think more and more I'm seeing that it's an improvement in collaboration between everyone needed, and that includes the customers, it includes business analysts, it might include marketing. It's everyone needed to build something and make sure that thing is delivering the value we expect.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, the Three Amigos conversation was about getting stuff into a test environment that works, and I can think of teams where that explicitly did involve questions of environments, infrastructure, those kind of things. Very much an operations need in there as well. And you don't have to limit yourself to three. You can have four Amigos if that's what it takes. Every team has people upstream and downstream of them. And you've got to make sure that communication is healthy all the way along, and just because DevOps and your UX guy, for example, seem to work at opposite ends of the process doesn't mean they shouldn't be talking to each other. One of the goals of DevOps has to be that we deliver supportable applications. They need to be deployable, testable, supportable, all those kind of things. And those are things that need to be built in, from the beginning. So people in operations have a very strong interest in working upstream, collaborating with people upstream of them. They'll achieve better results if they do, and with their customers as well. And again, in the book, I talked about one of my support teams that was hopelessly overburdened. And then did some analysis and found that most of its support work came from one place. And when they talked to the team responsible for a lot of their work, they actually were quite embarrassed about it and changed their behaviour. Agreed to, as a team, try to help each other before they called for extra support. And that actually increased the rate of learning for them, and reduced the workload for my guys. So that was a win-win for everybody. A lot of people in support roles think that you can never say no to anything, that the workload is what it is, but it's amazing really what opportunity you can have to shape that. I've done training with a lot of people in service delivery, and it's a hard message to swallow when it's part of the culture to say yes to everything, and to work into the evening and all the rest of it. But collaboration is the key to improving these things, and working with the people that build the software, working with your customers, making sure there's a good fit between them. Making sure that we plan ahead so that things go smoothly into production, that they continue to work well, that we continue to have the capacity there, and all the rest of it. These things have got to happen.
Yeah, and one thing you touched on just there was Scrum adopting some of the technical practices of XP.
Yes.
I suppose two interesting questions. One is, does Kanban itself mandate particular technical practices? And then I suppose the other question is, do you find, even if they're not mandated, there are technical practices that often end up being used in conjunction with Kanban?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it definitely doesn't mandate any technical practices. I mean, if you look at the Kanban method, the way it's described, it doesn't. It's not even specific to software development.
So it can be applied to any knowledge work, effectively.
That's the claim. And there are some very good examples of Kanban being used in knowledge work outside of software development, and that's definitely true. Examples in HR, in law, in marketing, various places. But I'm just very wary of making bold claims that it's applicable to any and all the rest of it. Yes. Yeah, never knowingly oversold in my case, but it doesn't mandate technical practices. But again, as I said, with collaboration, Kanban will help show you where things aren't working as well as they could. If you've got a part of your process that accounts for too much of the pain, or too much of the delay, or too much of the cost in the process, then there's opportunity there to do something about it. And some better technical practices may help you. And, if you've got stuff, if you've got a problem with defects, for example, then improving the automation of your testing, doing test-driven development, business analysis practices, perhaps, in terms of how you specify the expected behaviour of things. These are all going to help. Yeah.
So I mean, you've shared an awful lot of really interesting points there, Mike. So I think the thing I just wanted to finish off with really is asking you, for people who've not yet adopted Kanban, or perhaps not even heard of it yet, what would be your kind of top tips for getting started with it and finding out about it?
I think the first thing to do is to think about what you want to achieve with it. I mean, a lot of people dabble at Kanban, and that's okay. Just by dabbling at Kanban, you can learn an awful lot, and you can probably actually benefit yourself and the people around you quite significantly. Just getting a control of things, making more obvious what's going on, where the problems are, getting some agreement on whether your team or your system seems overburdened or not, and that's good. If your ambitions are a bit more far-reaching than that, using Kanban as the basis of a significantly improved end-to-end process, perhaps managing your project portfolio as well as the team level work, then I would put a little bit more investment into studying what other people have done, reading around. There are some good books out there, and not just mine. And there's a place for training as well. If you want, a team or even collections of teams singing off the same hymn sheet, trying to achieve some of the same things, some training can be very useful. But some idea of what it is you're trying to do is really helpful. One of the values of Kanban is agreement. And it's funny, that comes from the principle agree to pursue evolutionary change. And when I hear other people talking about that principle, most of the discussion is about what evolutionary change is technically. But I think it's useful to focus on the word agree, or on the value agreement. What is it we're trying to do here? What are we trying to achieve? What would good look like if we achieved it? What are the major problems that we've got to solve? What would our customers say about it? And do we agree what they would say? Have we actually talked to them? And would they agree? Would they agree with our diagnosis? If you're working, if you were as I was, a middle manager, do my seniors, my peers, the managers below me, are they, if their objectives aren't identical, are they at least aligned? Mm-hmm. If you're going to do any kind of significant change, then that level of agreement's really, really powerful. Actually, we're getting into what agenda shift is all about. Agreeing what's important, agreeing what changes we need to make, and what we hope to achieve from them, and then managing those effectively. Whether you look at that or not, though, study around, understand what's possible, decide what you want to get out of it. And I think the next steps after that should be hopefully a bit more obvious.
Great stuff. That is absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for spending some time talking about Kanban and DevOps, Mike.
That's my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
We look forward to chatting on Twitter in a few days' time.
Yes, good. We'll look forward to it.
Much appreciated. Cheers.